ECO120 from Group RCS1432A Group 5. The chosen country is Singapore. Our group member Muhammad Faiz Najmi bin Zamri, Muhammad Daniel Zikri bin Razali, Nur Izzah Akilah binti Zamri, Nurul Amirah Solehah binti Azab, and Hanani Hanin binti Pozlan. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Introduction of Singapore. Singapore is a country that located at the southern tip of the Malay Peninsula. Singapore has tropical climate like most of Southeastern Asia, which is hot and humid throughout the year, with the temperature usually is around 22 degrees to 34 degrees. The population residing in Singapore amount to about 6 million people of various ethnic groups such as Chinese, Malay, India. Each group have their cultural variety, language, and religions. There are three main languages that Singaporeans use to interact with each other, such as Malay, Tamil, and English. But the official language is English. 42% of Singaporean are foreigners, consist of foreigners have working there and students from other countries. Singapore is leading country in international trade and finance. Overview economy of Singapore. Singapore has a highly developed free market economy and is one of the busiest part in the world. Singapore's economy has an open business. The economy depends heavily on the main industry such as electronic, chemical, petroleum, and financial services. The main export partners is Hong Kong, Malaysia, China, Indonesia, European Union, and others. The currency that Singaporean use is Singapore dollar, SGD.
Population in Singapore. The Singapore Family Planning and Population Board was active to reduce the population growth rate from 30% population in 1965 to 22% during 1968 until 1973 to 16% in 1983 until 1984. The crude death rate dropped from 7.4% in 1957 to 5% in 1969 and rose slightly to 5.2% in 1984. The major concern in the marked differential fertility among women of different socio-economic groups. The government has introduced incentive schemes to encourage childbearing among highly educated women and discourage more than 1 to 2 children on the part of those in the low socio-economic groups. If age-specific fertility rates remain at the 1984 level in 1985 until 1987, crude birth rates will be 16.4 in 1985 and 1986, and 1987 will be 16.4. If the rate declined by 2% in 1985 and then remained constant in 1986 until 1987, the crude birth rate will be 16.1 in 1985, 16.2 in 1986, and 16.1 in 1987. On the other hand, if fertility increases 2% in year 1985-1987, the crude birth rates will be 16.8 in 1985, 17.2 in 1986, and 17.4 in 1987. Population in Singapore in 2018-2019. Now we are here focusing on the total population in 2018 was estimated at 5.64 million people. Furthermore, total population in Singapore was estimated at 5.7 million people in 2019, according to the latest census figures and projections of trading economics. Population by age group 2018 and 2019. The graph represented by population age group. Information is included by sex and age group as follows. Until 14 years is children, 15 until 24 years early working age, 25 until 54 years is prime working age, 55 until 64 years is mature working age, and 65 years and over is elderly. Dependency ratio. The dependency ratio is also referred to as the total of youth dependency ratio. In 2019, the old age dependency ratio in Singapore was at 20.4 resident aged 65 years and older per 100 residents aged 15 to 64 years. In the last 10 years, this ratio has increased from 12.2 in 2010. Singapore is facing the challenge of an increasingly aging population and declining birth rate, leading to a possible continuation of the trend of increasing old age dependency ratio.
Unemployment in Singapore. Definition of unemployment. Labour force participants being available and willing to work but are unable to find jobs. Definition of labour force. People in the age group of 15 to 64 years who are not working but actively looking for a job and available for work. Types of unemployment. Structural unemployment. Structural unemployment arise due to change in economic structure of a country. Number 2, frictional unemployment. It happens when workers or people change their job and some of them quit their jobs to look for other suitable employment. 3, cyclical unemployment. This type occurs when there is a lack of jobs because of a downswing in a business cycle or a recession. Number 4, seasonal unemployment. Seasonal unemployment arises due to a seasonal variation in the activities of particular industry. Unemployment rate in Singapore. Unemployment data in Singapore obtained from Labour Force Survey. Unemployment rate is the percentage of the labour force consists of unemployed and people who is actively seeking work. The formula of unemployment rate. Unemployment rate is equal to number of unemployed per labour force multiplied by 100%.
Employment rate in Singapore. Singapore's economy is expected to grow by 3% to 3.5% in 2018 at the upper end of an earlier prediction range of 2.5 to 3.5%. The employment rate for residents aged 15 to 24 it declined in recent years as more were engaged in the further studies. Rate for those aged between 25 to 64 years old increased from 75.6% to 80.5% over the same period. Singaporeans also enjoyed higher incomes with the pace of income growth faster in the recent 5 years. Employment percent in Singapore. Reason for unsuitable work for under 16. Workplace condition may use injury, servicing or attending to moving machinery, near live electrical apparatus that is not effectively insulated, underground work, work doing manual labor. If you are employing children as workmen doing manual labor, they cannot work at night between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. the next day. They cannot work on their rest day without permission labor. Full-time employment in Singapore. Work hours is it is up to the employers to define the number of hours to require to work every week. Advantages of full-time employees: first, medical insurance, dental and optical plan, paid time off, retirement benefits, notice of termination letter, serving notice period. Part-time employment in Singapore. A part-time employee who is under contract of service to work less than 35 hours a week. Part-time employees are covered by the Employment Act. As a part-time employee, your contract of service must have hourly basic rate of pay, hourly gross rate of pay, the hourly basic rate plus allowance. Leave for part-time employees: annual leave, sick and hospitalization, medical reimbursement, maternity leave. Income in Singapore. The average annual salary in Singapore is 67,152 dollars. This average out to be 5,596 per month, inclusive of the employer's CPF contribution. First, the median household income in Singapore is 9,293 dollars. Their non-income from work is 20.1% of Singaporeans. No income from work consists of Singaporeans above 60 years old, which is 8.6%, and not working below 16, which is 3.5%. There are 87.9% of Singaporeans with income from work. The graph shows that income per month for Singaporeans have increased from $570 to $13,581 in 10 decile. Main export of Singapore. Singapore is 15th largest export economy in the world. The top export of Singapore: machinery and equipment, electronics, telecommunication, pharmaceutical export, $329.7 billion, chemical, refined petroleum products. Main export partner: Hong Kong 90, which is 90%, China 60%, Malaysia 8.9%, European Union 88%, Indonesian 5.6%, other 41.62%, petroleum gas, Pakistan 176.4 million, which is 58.3%, China 49.7 million, which is 16.43%, South Korea 23.1 million, which is 7.62%.
Inflation. Meaning of inflation. Inflation is a measure quantitative, the rate of the average price level of a selected goods and also the increase of economy over some period of time. It shows that the rise in the general level of price which where a unit of a currency effectively buy less than it did in some prior periods. Then, often expressed as a percentage, inflation thus indicates a decrease in the purchasing goods. It is the power of nation's currency. Inflation can also be contrasted with deflation, which sometimes occurs when price instead decline. Inflation is classified into three types, which is demand pull inflation, cost push inflation, and lastly, built-in inflation. Nevertheless, the most commonly used inflation indexes are the Consumer Price Index, also known as CPI, and the Wholesale Price Index, also known as WPI. Next, inflation can also be viewed either positively or negatively, is depending on the individual viewpoint and also the rate of change. Also, ideally, an optimal level of inflation is also required to promote spending to a certain extent instead of saving, hereby nurturing economic growth. Understanding the inflation. As price rise, a single unit of a currency lost value as it buys fewer goods and service. The loss of this purchasing power impacts the general cost of living for the common public, which without a doubt leads to a deceleration in economic growth. Nevertheless, the, conser- the consensus view among the economists is that sustained inflation occurs when a nation money supply growth outpaces the economic growth. Inflation in Singapore. Singapore's annual inflation rate fell to 0.3% in February 2020 from 0.8% in prior months and compared with market consensus of 0.35%. This was lower inflation rate since July last year as price went up less for both food 1.6% versus 1.7% in January and the transport of 1.7% versus 4.2%. In addition, costs fell further for housing and utilities from negative 0.2% versus negative 0.4%. Education, negative 0.5% versus negative 0.6%. Healthcare, negative 0.1% versus negative 1.3%. And clothing and footwear, negative 2.7% versus negative 3.8%. Meanwhile, prices of miscellaneous goods and services were flat after a 0.2% drop in January. The annual core inflation rate, which includes accommodation and private road transport costs, dropped to 0.1%, the first fall since January 2010, missing expectations of 0.1% gain and after a 0.3% rise in January. One a month basis. Consumer price rose 0.1% in February after a 0.2% fall in January. Cause of inflation. The major cause of inflation in Singapore at the present when the global factors hamper or change due to demand that leads to the change in the supply patterns, price and also production. Thus, there are many other factors in economic which is impacted by the global factors and the policies of the country itself. Such factors are employment level, wages change, industrialized resources, and etc. Furthermore, the inflation is the rise in the prices with the decrement in the currency value. There are some products which are being taken into account with the respect to the price index, which also calculate the inflation based on this called consumer price index. Inflation does affect the redistribution of the resources in the country. It also does change the production pattern, example for a limit. Inflation is considered good but beyond the limit itself. It is actually can harm the economy itself. Inflation also has two types. The first type is demand pull inflation. What means of demand pull inflation, you ask? Demand pull inflation means the rise in the prices is due to increase in demand. Example, Where there is a high demand and the supply is low, the price of the products tends to rise, hence why it's called demand pull inflation. The second type are cost push inflation. Cost push inflation can be due to the rise to the cost due to expensive raw materials, import goods, technology, and etc. Example, rise in the prices offered by the suppliers, emergency wars, or any other externalities, rise in wages of the laborers due to the union or other factors. Furthermore, it may happen when due to the rise in taxes by the government, duty prices, and etc. Inflation can be various types of based of its percentage. Firstly, stagflation. In this type of inflation, there is a lot of unemployment in the market and there is also a stagnation in economic growth. Secondly, is hyperinflation. This is also called as a running inflation because it is very harmful for the body. It is very harmful for the growth in the economic and it can lead to the collapse of the whole monetary system of the country. Cause of inflation in Singapore. Firstly, one of the cause of inflation in Singapore is the high growth of the population. Secondly, the growth of the economic and GDP. Next cause of inflation is high in taxation. Besides, cause of inflation is increase in price of transportation. Last but not least, the immigration is an open door immigration. And finally, the last one of inflation in Singapore is consumer price increase over time.
Fiscal policy in Singapore. Prudent expenditure. First, the main case of government expenditure is delivering public goods and services to Singaporeans. Second, key areas of expenditures are education, public housing, healthcare, and national security. Third, development expenditure has accounted for around one-third of government expenditure. Principles of fiscal policy. First, the private sector is the engine of growth. The government's role is to provide a stable environment for the private sector of thrive. Second, tax and expenditure policy should be justified on microeconomics ground and focus on supply side issues. Third, the countercyclical role of fiscal policy is limited due to high import leakages. Monetary policy in Singapore. First, the exchange rate of Singapore economy is more effective tool for maintaining price stability. Second, MAS primary goal is to ensure price stability in the Singapore dollar. Third, MAS manages the Sing dollar exchange rate against a trade wave basket or currencies of Singapore. Fourth, MAS also intervene in the foreign exchange market to prevent dollar exchange rate from fluctuating too much. Fifth, was MAS monetary policy focuses on the exchange rate rather than interest rate.
Now the conclusion. We learn the population of Singapore country comes from many factors. To have a sustainable population for Singapore rests on three key pillars that suggested. First, their population and workforce must support a dynamic economy that can steadily create good jobs and opportunities to meet Singaporeans' hopes and aspirations. Many Asian cities are modernizing rapidly and catching up on them. Singapore must continue to develop and upgrade to remain a keynote in the network of global cities, a vibrant place where jobs and opportunities are created. A dynamic economy will provide us with more resources and room to pursue inclusive growth strategies to benefit all segments of our society. In conclusion, population challenges are complex and multifaceted and have far-reaching effects on our current and future generations. There are no simple solutions. We need to find a balance. If we do too little to address the demographic challenge, we risk becoming a steadily graying society, losing vitality and verve, with our young people living for opportunities elsewhere. But If we take it too many immigrants and foreign workers, we will weaken our national identity and sense of belonging and feel crowded out of our own home.